Let me ask you something most people avoid. How many unfinished projects are sitting in the background of your life right now? That business idea you were excited about, the YouTube channel you launched, the book you outlined, the gym routine you committed to, the course you enrolled in, the podcast you planned, the side hustle you swore would change everything. They're still there, aren't they? And when someone brings them up, you feel it. That subtle tension, that quiet embarrassment, that need to explain. Yeah, I just got busy. It wasn't the right time. I'm thinking about getting back to it. Why do you feel ashamed? Why have you turned ambition into something you need to apologize for? Here's the truth nobody says out loud. Your so-called graveyard of unfinished projects isn't proof that you lack discipline. It's proof that you have courage. Most people never start. They overthink. They wait. They talk. You moved. Starting takes nerve. It takes belief. It takes the willingness to risk looking foolish. And the moment you stop apologizing for trying, the moment you own every attempt without shame, something shifts. You stop playing defense. You stop shrinking. You stop explaining your ambition. And that's when you become dangerous. Because a person who isn't afraid to start again can't be stopped. We've been sold a lie so convincing that most of us never question it. If you don't finish, you failed. It sounds logical, responsible, mature, but it's not truth. It's conditioning. That voice in your head calling you inconsistent, that's perfectionism. That comparison you make when you scroll and see someone else crushing it, that's social pressure. That tight feeling in your chest when you quit something. That's your ego trying to protect your identity, because quitting feels like weakness. But here's what nobody teaches you. Successful people are not successful because every idea worked. They're successful because they generated more ideas, tested more paths, took more swings, missed more shots. They didn't attach their identity to a single project. They detached. The difference isn't talent, it's tolerance. Tolerance for looking inexperienced. Tolerance for being misunderstood. Tolerance for pivoting when something no longer fits who you're becoming. That's not failure, that's evolution. Your unfinished projects are not a graveyard of broken dreams. They're research, they're field notes, they're evidence that you are in motion. And people in motion eventually find momentum. People who never start, they just stay comfortable. And comfort never built anything extraordinary. Let's tell the truth. You didn't quit because you're lazy. Lazy people don't start ambitious things in the first place. You quit because the adrenaline faded. Because the early excitement turned into routine. Because the likes slowed down. Because the results didn't show up on your timeline. Because progress was slower than your expectations. Or maybe, and this is important, you changed. You evolved. What once felt exciting started to feel forced. What once felt aligned started to feel heavy. And instead of recognizing that as self-awareness, you labeled it as failure. But growth doesn't always look like finishing what you started. Sometimes growth looks like outgrowing it. Here's the powerful shift. Starting something and walking away when it no longer fits who you're becoming. That's maturity. That's discernment. That's self-respect. Staying in something just to prove you're consistent. That's ego. That's performing discipline for the approval of others. Consistency is valuable, but only when it's aligned. If you're clinging to something that no longer fits, you're not being strong. You're being afraid to pivot. Real confidence says, I'm allowed to change. And once you accept that, Quitting stops being weakness. It becomes refinement. Here's what's really happening beneath the surface. Your brain hates unfinished loops. There's an actual psychological principle called the Zeigarnik effect. The idea that incomplete tasks stick in your mind longer than completed ones. They linger. They resurface at random moments. They tap you on the shoulder when you're trying to move forward. Not loudly, just enough to make you question yourself. And over time, those unfinished projects stop being neutral. They start becoming personal. You don't just think, I didn't finish that. You start thinking, I'm the kind of person who doesn't finish. See the shift? An event becomes a story. A story becomes identity, and identity quietly shapes your behavior. If you believe you never follow through, you hesitate before starting again. You hold back. You self-sabotage to stay consistent with the identity you've adopted. But what if the story is wrong? What if you're not someone who quits? What if you're someone who experiments aggressively? Someone who tests ideas? Someone who refuses to settle? That's a completely different identity. And identity determines destiny. Change the story you tell about your graveyard, and you change the future you're capable of building. Here's the shift that changes everything, and most people are too afraid to make it. Stop apologizing, not just out loud, internally. When someone says, "Hey, whatever happened to that business you started?" Notice your first instinct. Do you tense up? Do you scramble for a polished explanation? Do you downplay it? That reaction isn't about the project. It's about shame. Now imagine responding differently. I tested it. I learned a lot. Then I moved on. That's it. No long defense. No over-explaining. No nervous laughter. Just clarity. Powerful people don't defend their experiments. They don't treat every pivot like a public failure. They understand that movement is part of mastery. Trying is not embarrassing. Hiding is. The moment you stop apologizing for your attempts, something powerful happens. You remove the emotional penalty for action. You stop associating risk with humiliation. And when fear is removed from the equation, action multiplies. You start faster. You recover quicker. You take smarter risks. Because now you're not trying to protect your ego. You're building your future. And a person who isn't afraid to try again, that person becomes unstoppable. Here's something most people completely overlook. Most people don't fail because they quit. They fail because they never start. They're terrified of being seen trying, terrified of not finishing, terrified of proving their own doubts right, so they stay in planning mode, research mode, someday mode. But you start, and that alone puts you ahead of the majority. Serial starters build something most people never develop: speed. You move from idea to execution faster. Pattern recognition. You begin to see what works and what doesn't almost instinctively. Creative risk tolerance. You're not paralyzed by uncertainty. Emotional resilience. You felt disappointment and survived it. That's not weakness. That's conditioning. Every project that didn't work trained your judgment. Every idea you abandoned sharpened your instincts. Every pivot strengthened your adaptability. You're not scattered. You're seasoned. You're not inconsistent. You're accumulating reps. And reps create mastery, not theory, not perfection. Reps. The person who takes the most intelligent swings over time wins. So stop looking at your history like it's evidence against you. It's proof you're building capacity, and capacity compounds. The real problem isn't quitting. It's what you do after you quit. It's the internal attack, the self-criticism, the quiet narrative that starts running in the background. Here we go again. I can't stick to anything. What's wrong with me? That voice is far more damaging than the unfinished project ever was. Failure costs effort. Self-judgment costs identity. When you attack yourself, you don't just abandon the project. You chip away at your confidence. You hesitate the next time you feel inspired. You question your own momentum before it even builds. Now imagine something different. Instead of saying, "I never stick to anything," you say, "I'm refining my direction." Feel that shift. One statement labels you as flawed. The other frames you as evolving. Language shapes identity. Identity shapes behavior. Behavior shapes results. If you see yourself as inconsistent, you'll act cautiously. If you see yourself as someone calibrating and adjusting, you'll act strategically. The story you tell about your past determines the courage you bring into your future. So change the narrative. You're not quitting. You're course correcting. And people who course correct consistently don't drift. They eventually lock onto their target and hit it. Here's what happens when you truly stop apologizing for your past attempts. You start faster. You don't sit in overthinking mode for weeks. You don't wait for the perfect plan. You move. You recover quicker. When something doesn't work, you don't spiral into self-doubt. You assess, adjust, and pivot. You detach from outcomes. You stop tying your self-worth to results. A project failing doesn't mean you failed. It just means the strategy needs refining. And most importantly, you begin to treat life like a laboratory. Every idea becomes an experiment. Every setback becomes feedback. Every pivot becomes data. That mindset is dangerous, in the best way possible. Because the unstoppable person isn't someone who avoids failure. It's someone who isn't emotionally crushed by it. It's someone who never loses the willingness to begin again. The world doesn't reward perfection. It rewards iteration. It rewards the person who shows up, tests, adapts, and keeps moving. Your graveyard stops being a source of shame. It becomes your training ground. And once you see it that way, you stop fearing your past. You start leveraging it. That's when momentum becomes inevitable. Let me leave you with this. Your unfinished projects are not ghosts haunting your potential. They're stepping stones that built it. Every idea you started, even the ones that didn't last, stretched you. They forced you to think bigger, move differently, see yourself outside your comfort zone. You don't need to go back and resurrect every old dream. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You need to move forward without shame. Stop explaining your ambition like it's a flaw. Stop apologizing for trying. Stop shrinking every time someone reminds you of who you used to be. Own your experiments. Own your evolution. Own your pivots. Strong people don't pretend they never changed direction. They're proud that they did. Because the moment you remove shame from your attempts, you unlock the one trait that guarantees long-term success. Relentless, fearless action. You stop hesitating. You stop over-identifying with failure. You stop waiting for certainty. And once you become someone who is never afraid to start again, no matter how many times you've pivoted, you become unstoppable. Not because you never fail, but because you never stop moving.